Hey, friend, Chris here from WideLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. Welcome to day 25 in our Newbie to Ninja series here on the channel and website, where I'll help you go from being a beginner in Logic Pro to become an expert, fully comfortable and capable to get right down to making awesome music in this amazing application. Yesterday, we dug into the piano roll editor in Logic Pro, which is your primary editor for editing your MIDI and software instrument performances. And we explored both inputting and editing your MIDI performances using two different mouse tools, the pencil tool as well as the brush tool. While these two mouse tools are incredibly powerful for inputting and editing your MIDI performances, there's some other features in Logic Pro that make editing even faster. And that would be both the Time Quantize as well as Scale Quantize features. For those not familiar, quantizing is a process of editing your performances and adjusting their timing to better line up with the tempo and time signature of your projects. With this particular project, we're operating at a tempo of 90 beats per minute or 90 BPM, and the time signature is that of 4/4. And if you take a look at the background of both the piano roll as well as the tracks area, we have a ruler that lines the top of each window, as well as background lines to let us know where each individual bar, beat, and division are occurring at this particular tempo at this particular time signature. And if we zoom in by holding Control and Option, clicking, holding, and dragging over a section, we have the potential to see this grid in finer or broader resolution. If we take a look at the individual note events of this key performance, we can see that certain notes are ahead of major bars and beats, other notes are behind, and this may or may not be desirable depending on your performance and project. So with quantizing, we could select the most offensive notes in terms of their timing, and from here we could select a time quantize value to quantize these notes too. If we click on the drop-down menu, we have plenty of straight note values that we could quantize to, such as quarter, eighth, or 16th notes. If you have a more complicated pattern, you can work within triplets. There are different swing values that you could choose, and more. I'll select an eighth note value for this performance. And from here, if we adjust the strength slider right below the time quantize drop-down, you'll see the notes start to conform their performance to the closest eighth note value on this grid. All right, so now every note of every chord are landing exactly at the same time at the exact same eighth note value. And the great thing about quantizing is it's non-destructive. So just because we choose to quantize all these notes to the same value right now, we could always revert back to the original timing of the performance just by adjusting the slider back down to 0. All right, so now every note is placed back to its original position. So let's listen to the original performance of this region by pressing on the play button for this region in the ruler at the top in the piano roll. Okay, and if we adjust the strength of the quantizing, once again, I'm going to make sure to select all the notes in this region using key command, Command and A. Adjust the strength to 100%, and let's hear it now. All right, now because of quantizing all these notes of every chord, every note is landing at the exact same time. Again, this may or may not be desirable depending on the performance. I'm going to select all the notes again and set the strength slider back down to 0 and set these notes back to their original positions. I'm going to press key command P to close the piano roll. Now let's take a listen to this quick riff that I put together for today's video, and then we'll really start to dig into quantizing. Here we go. All right, so that's the riff that we're going to work with today. And I don't know if you can tell, but as I'm listening to the performance, I'm noticing that at moments, certain elements of the performance lag behind the tempo. Sometimes parts of the performance are ahead. So I'll use quantizing to quickly adjust the timing of these performances. Now, as a quick aside, anytime there's a conversation about quantizing, there's always the topic or conversation of, is quantizing good or bad for music? Is it a good thing that every single note is locked exactly to the grid at every bar, beat, and division line? Or are we completely removing the natural and human element of these performances? Honestly, that's not the conversation for today's video. It's entirely up to you and what feels good for your music. The point of today's video is just to point out that these features exist to make your life easier as you edit your MIDI performances. All right, with that out of the way, let's zoom in on this drum performance. And you may notice by looking at the individual notes, some notes are ahead of the beat, some are behind. And honestly, the relationship of the notes and the grid is not that bad. More or less, every note falls closely with the beat that it should land on. If we enable the metronome by pressing K on our Mac's keyboard, and if we take a listen to this drum performance, all right, so more or less everything sounds pretty good, but over here with the snare and hi-hat, they didn't quite land with the metronome. So of course, once again, we could select all notes, go up to the time quantize value, and I'm going to set this to that of a 16th note value. That would be most appropriate for this performance. And we can then adjust the strength slider till every note is exactly on the grid. And if we take a listen, all right, so now our snare and hat hit land exactly with the metronome. They no longer sound late in the production. If we choose all our notes again and choose a different value to quantize to, we can get some pretty interesting results. We've seen some notes move around to the closest 8th note value based on their original position. Let's take a listen. All right, it's pretty interesting. It's not my favorite. I'll stick with a quantization value of 16th notes. Underneath the strength slider, we also have a slider to adjust the amount of swing that can be introduced to this performance. So if we start to move the swing slider to the right, we can see that some of our notes are being pushed back in time. So let's now take a listen. That's actually pretty awesome. I like that a lot. All right, so from here we have quantized every single note across both regions on this Drum Machine Designer track. And we've 100% quantized this performance to a 16th note value with 100% swing added. I'm going to select all my notes and set the strength back to 0, as well as the swing back to 0. Now, depending on the nature of your music and production, you may want to hard quantize every single note of a performance. However, you may find occasion where you don't want to quantize every single note. You want to quantize the most offensive notes, the notes that are the furthest away from their intended position. Well, you can do exactly that by deselecting all notes in the piano roll by clicking on the background. If you set the time quantize to your chosen value and then set the strength slider to 100%, as well as adjust the swing as you see necessary. Now, if we zoom in and if we start selecting notes in our performance, so I think it was somewhere around here where I didn't like the snare and hat. If we select those notes and then press Q on our Mac's keyboard, both these notes have been hard quantized based on this quantized value that I've set. So instead of quantizing every single note in the performance, we can quantize just the selected notes. And we can work our way down the line, just selecting notes, pressing Q on our Mac's keyboard, or if we undo, we can press the Q button right here. By the way, if you don't want to hard quantize everything in your performance exactly to the bar and beat, you could set the strength slider to any value that feels good to you. And if we select all these notes, press Q, we can see that these notes have been mostly quantized while still maintaining some variation and humanity. So now this performance has been quantized instead of to 100%, instead only 61% of the way. If we take a listen, pretty awesome. But if we return to our key performance right here, I'm going to use key command P or E to open the editor. And if we take a listen to our performance, the intention of the keys is not to land all exactly at the same time. Instead, they're intended to roll through the different notes. Let's take a listen. Right, so now if we hard quantize all these different notes to a particular value, it will lose the rolling effect of the original performance. If we take a listen, even with a strength at 61%, Right, so it doesn't sound bad, it's just not the original intent. So how do we make sure that overall the keys feel in time with the production while preserving the original intent of the performance with those rolling chords? Well, if you take note of the Time Quantize heading in the piano roll editor, right next to Time Quantize in parentheses it says Classic. And that's because there's an alternate mode that you can choose when quantizing. So let's select either specific regions of this performance, or click on the track header in the tracks area to select every region across the track. Let's return the playhead to bar 1 and zoom in. And now with the inspector open, let's hone in on the region inspector right at the top. If you take note, there's also a quantize parameter in the region inspector. And we can set this as well to a particular value. All right, setting this back to off. If we click on the quantize heading in the region inspector for software instrument regions, we have the option to choose either classic quantize or smart quantize. Now check this out. Let's select every single note in our performance. And now if we adjust the strength slider based on an eighth note value, watch what happens. Look at that. The individual notes of the performance have adjusted their timing, yet the original effect of the performance remains intact. If we take a listen, we still have that same rolling effect across the keys, and yet the performance is more in time with our project. If we set this back to 0, take a listen. And set the strength back to 100%. Smart quantizing takes into consideration not only the grid position that you're hoping to quantize to, but also the relationship of the individual MIDI notes as a group. Smart quantizing is a great function and feature for performances that have a lot of nuance that don't necessarily want to be locked to the grid. And as noted, we can set this on a per region basis. So we could say smart quantizing for this one region and set the second region back to classic quantizing. So we could quantize everything strictly to the grid. And lastly, we have scale quantize directly beneath the time quantize options. With scale quantize, instead of adjusting the timing of a performance, we can instead lock the individual notes to a particular scale. So check it out. This particular performance is in C natural minor. All right, that's cool, but what if we want this performance to now be in the key of C major, so it sounds a little happier? Well, I'll select both the key performance as well as the bass performance. And if we zoom out in the piano roll, if I select every single note and then set the scale quantize to that of C major, we can see that individual notes have been adjusted to match that scale. Take a listen. That could be pretty fun, right? So you can go buck wild with this if you want. And everything just conforms to the new scale. These quantizing features for MIDI will make short work of editing your performances so you don't have to edit individual notes one at a time with the pointer or pencil tool. All right, now tomorrow let's dig into editing audio in your projects by using Logic Pro's Flex Time system. Thanks so much, and I'll see you for more. Take care.